depending on what it is or the reason you want to do the art, I think watercolor is just such a perfect thing because it's so simple. I do a lot of sketching when I go out places, and I'm forever sitting on a curb, sketching wherever I am. Travel sketching has become such a cool thing because you really understand what's there. You actually have to look at it for 30, 40 minutes while you're there. So most of the sketches that I do are that length of time. So today, I just wanted to go over some stuff that's really important. When I've been doing a set of classes for the Macmillan Art Center here in Qualicum or Parksville, and we did plein air. So, I mean, you're kind of like, okay, let's take 20 people who've never painted, never done watercolor, never sketched anything. Let's go out into the wild and do our thing. And I was like, how am I going to show this? And really and truly, I think the saving grace to this whole thing has been insisting that we all do thumbnails. And if you've ever taken a painting class, every teacher that you see will say, let's do thumbnails. And you go, yeah, I've done that, no problem. Yeah. And none of us ever do. But it really takes the overwhelm away from things. So when you're out there and you're looking at it, and you're like, well, I don't know, there's a lot. And we really want to do all of it. And this helps you focus in and look at specifically what it is you want to paint. And it helps you to put this stuff down on a little piece of paper and just kind of focus on what's important. And it helps you because you get into the painting and then you forget to look at the shadows or the shapes or any of that sort of stuff. So I really highly recommend it, that it really does help. It is an important tool for doing your artwork. The other thing is just that now you've got, it's like a roadmap. And so now you've got something that you can actually look at, and it reminds you what it was that you did. But the biggest thing when you first start doing a painting, and I always ask everybody, what is it about this? In my case, we're doing this specifically for my house because that's, was easy, supposedly easy. But what is making you want to paint this? Because if you want to photograph, just take one. But for the most part, you're painting this because it said something to you or it represents something to you. Like, what's your story? And that's the really big deal for doing these things, is why do you want to paint it? And what is it about it that's important? Because that'll give you the focus point, and that'll tell you what it is that you're trying to paint, and how you're going to do it. So I'm going to get you, Pamela, to switch to the other one, because we did have a whole on thing, but technology. So thumbnails. So I think you guys can read this, can you? So thumbnails are a small study. They're just visual notes that organize your thoughts. So there's no detail in them. And that's what's so important with this, because every one of us, when we start, just want to put every single leaf and branch in. And really and truly, that's not the purpose of this. This is supposed to be for you to just go in and identify your focus. It helps you also with composition. And I always recommend to everybody that you do about 3 of them. So you can kind of go, actually, in my mind, it looked better, but now I actually like the way this one worked out better. So the really big deal is you're going to just take a really small box, like 2 inches by 1 inch, not very big at all. Put 3 of them on, and you can see on my page here, I've got them here. You're going to do 3 of them. The other thing you're going to do is it's only going to take you 5 minutes maximum to do each one. Otherwise, you will get into the details and you'll start focusing on all the business stuff. So the deal is that you're supposed to be looking at shapes, not things. So when you look at something like a tree, it's a triangle, or a building is a rectangle, or whatever that is, you want to make sure that you don't really name it, because your brain says, oh, I know how to make a tree. And it doesn't take what it is that you're looking at and translate it down onto your paper. So look at triangles, shapes, rectangles, circles, ellipses, and those kinds of things. And if you look in this screen, you can see that that's what I put in at the very beginning. There's no detail whatsoever. You can do that later on, but it also helps you decide where you want to put this. And so you can refocus it and change it to another section. If you decided you just wanted to focus on that, you could change where you're at. But this, it's easier than if you've got it on your big, huge piece of paper. So once you get your shapes in, now let's see if I can get this properly. There we go. Once you get your shapes in, then you start looking at the shapes inside the shape. So in this case, the building had a triangle and a rectangle, and then there are two small rectangles inside, a rectangle across the bottom. And that's the idea, is that you talk to yourself like that. Otherwise, you start putting in windows and doors and roofs and stuff, and you're not going to get the correct shapes that go with this stuff. Then once you do that, then you can start doing some color with it. The other thing that a lot of stuff that happens, let's see if that will work. There we go. Is that there are positive and negative shapes. So the positive is the thing that you can name. So the little island with the tree on the top of it, you can name it. The sky and stuff in the background, if you were to paint that sky in around the outside of the tree, that's the negative space, and that then paints the positive. So sometimes you want to make sure that you've got shapes and things in the background that will help to identify what's in the focus in the foreground. The other thing that everybody's always on about is how you get to draw this stuff. And I use what I call comparative measurement. So when I start with my painting, whatever it may be, I identify the largest shape that there is. So I put that in first. If you get that in first, then you're sure, because otherwise, if you start at the top of the building with its steeple and you work your way down, you're like, oh, I'm only to the second floor and there's 6 floors in this thing. So this makes sure that you get the biggest thing in. So if you're doing the Eiffel Tower, then you get the Eiffel Tower in first, and everything else gets compared to that. And that's how I get away with not having to do any measurements and stuff. So now I start looking at it, and I look at this tree and I say, where does this building line up with the tree? Well, it's at the top third of it, and it only goes down to the, so it's in the middle third. That's where that building is. And that's how you end up getting all of these things to match up so that you've got the right shapes and the right stuff. The other thing that I use lots of is I get, I'm sideways now on my screen. That's odd.
Something's happened with the
Oh,
view.
it's
Want to give
me.
it a little wiggle? I'm not
Yeah.
sure what happened.
Well, that's interesting. Let's see if I turn it that, nope, I got to turn it the other way. Let's
Maybe
see if I turn.
it might have just moved from landscape to portrait.
Yeah,
View.
but I don't know how to do that. Change that. So let's just move it around this way. There we go. Is that going to work? Not as well.
Yeah, it's just if you just kind of hold your phone as if you're looking through a window, it usually adjusts.
Well,
That's unusual.
no kidding. That seems to be the way the world's working today.
There you go.
Am I back?
Yeah, that worked.
Woohoo! Okay.
Yeah, so we just need to get it so that it's
focused again.
Yeah, we're upside down though, so we're gonna have to swivel it. We're all in it together and everyone's smiling. I love it.
I hope nobody gets seasick here as I'm whirling around.
There you go.
Hey, look at that.
We're now, back in action, folks.
Woohoo! Okay.
Nice work. Nice work.
Okay. Where was I before technology changed my... we were talking about
yes,
the angles. So if you're old enough to remember how to read an analog clock, then if you look at this angle here, you can see that that might be the angle in a roof. And so that's going to tell you what the angle is. So I use those kinds of things to put my shapes in. So that's how I sort of tackle this thing. And it's how I'm actually pretty quick when I'm doing this stuff. So when you're going to do your thumbnail, so we're going to be looking at my the front of my house here. I go through and I look at several of them. So if you can see here, there's not a whole lot of shapes in or detail in there. I've just got blobs. And then I kind of go, well, do I want this head on? Do I want to be kind of over here on the side where I've got the trees? Or do I want to be over on the other side of the house? There's a big tree over here and looking at it this way. So this helps me decide what it is that I want to paint, and it gives me my composition so that this is a lot better than, you know, just sort of tackling it on the paper and then erasing. So when I'm going to do this, this is essentially what I would end up with. This is my beginning of my sketch. Like this is pretty much as much detail as I would put on when we go to do the sketch. So you want to look for the darkest darks, the lightest lights, and you want to decide where the light source is going to come from. Because when you're out there painting, you could be there for a while and the sun changes, the shadows change. So you need to make sure that you identify those at the beginning of this whole thing. The other way that people read things is that if this bush in the front and this stuff in the foreground, it will have a lot of detail and it'll have a lot of value changes, whereas the stuff in the background will be a little bit lighter and it won't be quite as detailed. In the foreground, we'll put some hard edges on it. And in watercolor, to get hard edges, you need to have wet paint on dry paper, and you'll get a few more hard edges. That gives you more detail in the foreground, and that helps the person tell that this tree is in front of that one or this one over here, or whatever that case may be. So just a quick blurb, because I don't know who's who in this zoo here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about watercolor. And watercolor has a bad rap. Everybody thinks that watercolor is just this scary medium that you know, don't use that because it's just too difficult and you can't fix it and stuff. But I'm here to bring you over to the light side so that we can paint with transparent watercolor. The really big deal, there's three factors. You got paint, you got paper, and you got water. And believe it or not, out of all of them, the water is the tricky bit. It's the part that makes watercolor difficult to manage. Paper, I strongly recommend that you go and get 100% cotton paper, 140 pound. Don't use the cheapy stuff just because, quote, you're learning. The paper and the paint don't act the same way if you're not using good paper. The other thing that you use is good artist grade paint. And I am pleased to tell you that my paint that I have here is the same kind that Opus sells. It is good paint. It is artist grade paint. And the difference between artist grade and student grade is usually the little bits that they put together, the little pieces of stuff that make the paint are much smaller, and they're usually of a better grade than you're going to get with student grade. The other thing with student grade is often you end up with them trying to make a color and they'll add some extra colors in it to kind of make it look the same. And so when you put the 2 or 3 colors together, you get mud really, really easily. So these tend to be single pigment, very small little pigment particles so that they float nicely on the paper. Watercolor is stuck together with gum arabic, and gum arabic's the stuff that's on the back of your envelope when you lick that and then stick it onto the paper. That's why you can steam it open and check and see what your daughter's getting in her mail. So there you go. So watercolor, when you put the water on the paper, it opens up those fibers. It's like if you put water onto cotton shirt, it opens up, the particles go across there and then they stick down in to the little fibers when they open up. And so those little fibers get 1, 2, 3 little pieces of paint stuck in there. This one might have 2 little pieces. This one has 4. That's how come you get these lovely gradations of color. And it's water. If you take and add more water to watercolor paint, you're going to end up with a lighter color. And it's the only medium that you can do that with that ends up with just by adding water. So I'm just going to take a little piece of paper here. I'm going to put some of this, where's my spray bottle? So you should spray the watercolor paints before you get started, and that just sort of activates the gum arabic. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to put, I'll use a dark color, so Prussian blue. So there we go. I'm going to put the Prussian blue on, and you can see that it's quite light. I'm not going to get any more water. I'm just going back in and get more Prussian blue. I'm going to go back in and get a bit more, and I'm going to go back in and get a bit more. And see how dark that gets? That's because I'm having less and less water and more pigment. So value ranges with watercolor are modified just by adding or not having as much pigment in the load that you would have for any other medium. Usually you have to add a darker color, or you have to add white with oils or acrylics. The other thing that I always use is I always use a sponge. Oh, and I had gotten a nice clean one out just for this, not the crappy dirty one. It's just a kitchen cellulose sponge. And the reason I do that is if I take a paper towel, so if I take a dry brush and I go in and get some paint, I end up with, you're not sure how much you've got. If I go in and take a brush, tap it off on here, you have to hold it on here. This is damp. This is damp. Now when I go get paint, I know how much water I've got in this thing. If you use a paper towel to dry it off, you're not totally sure how much paint and how much water you've got. But this helps to modify it, and eventually your little tiny brain eventually figures that out. So those are kind of the watercolor tips that I have to start. And a small, I do have a book here about watercolor skill builder, and it is all about plein air. So a lot of this stuff that's here, this is what we're aiming for in here. So let's go ahead and see if I can start with my sketch. So with a thumbnail sketch, I would go in and have a look and see. So the biggest thing in my view here is the trees that are around the outside of the building. So there's a tree, and there is where the roof comes in. I look at the roof and I think, okay, it's a rectangle and it's about that big. The bottom part is a little bit bigger than that, and it's down there, and there's a bush over here, and there's a little bit of a triangle there. And then there's this bush in the front. And now that I'm looking at it, I'm going, I didn't leave nearly as much room in the front as I wanted. I've got more sky. So what I would do is this is my plan. I'm just going to say, okay, I need more grass in the front. There's a window there. There's some windows there. So that's the sum total of what I would do. If I decided, well, I don't know, maybe I just want to focus in on the center part of the building. So I could go in and I could put my triangle trees in there, and I could just go in, and if I made this smaller, I could just go in and put the two buildings in the front, or the two windows in the front, and decide if that's what I want to do. These things help you to focus on what it is that you're trying to bring across on this whole thing. And I'll bring these out because this sort of showed it. So there would be the first one, the second one, the next one. So, all right, let's go ahead and get going on this thing. So here we go. I almost always paint with sketch with a Sharpie. And believe it or not, and everybody's like, really? I don't even have a pencil in my sketch kit. And so the reason I do that is because it stops you going in and getting so tentative and putting this line in. Man, when you do this with a Sharpie, you go in and you just go for it, and you're much more sure about what you're doing. And in the end, when you get finished with it, I mean, this is the finished product. You really can't see all the Sharpie all that much. But the other deal is you want to make sure that you don't put a ton of detail in, because then you want the watercolor to go ahead and do its job too. All right, so here we go. So let's put our first tree in over here. And I go in and I just see where I'm holding my pen. I just kind of go in and say, okay, there we go. And this comes down here. And then there's this bush that I have in the front. In the spring, they're very lovely rhododendrons. They're not looking so great right now. So see, I am not getting all fussy about this stuff. So then I look at this other tree up here, and this one is a little bit bigger. And these are almost like continuous line drawings. There's kind of a bit of the bush. I'm going to go across here and put where my roof line goes in. There we go. And I know that the trees are about, this building is about a third, so these trees actually can be a little bit bigger to make this work. So see, you can grow this stuff as you're kind of going along. You think, okay, all right. So now I've got the trees in, and there is one more tree over here. Right? And then I'm going to put my roof, or the, oops, see, after I told you guys not to say, name it. So there's my rectangle. And then I know that in the rectangle down here, we've also got to have, there's that bush over here. It's called a smoke bush, and I skin that thing alive every spring, and it just grows and overtakes the house. It's quite big, but it's pretty. I like it. Okay, so there's the bush over there. There's the house in there. And I'm going to say, oh, there's some bushes. Thank heavens for bushes, because then you don't have to put every detail in, right? There we go. And I know that there is another rectangle over here. That's the spare room. If anybody wants to come to visit, there's a spare room. And there's this one. Okay, there's another rectangle. And then the door is here. And there we go. There's those. Now that needs to go up a little bit further. But see, I'm not all that worried about it and about all the details and stuff as to what's what and who's who in this zoo. We're good. So there's the beginnings of what I would do with this thing. So now we can start with some painting. Okay, so with painting, wet into wet or wet into dry. The stuff in the background is almost always wet into wet, and that's because it's going to be blurry and you get these really soft blends of color. I almost always put the sky in first, and I always tell everybody, you put the sky in first, and if it isn't great, just go get another piece of paper, because you can't really fix a sky. You really just can't. And I'm not going to put that ugly sky in that's there today, which is really, really gray and ugly. I'm actually going to go ahead and put a nice sky in, and I'll show you how I put them in, because it's kind of fun. The other thing is with watercolor, you can always go from lighter to darker. You can put more paint over top of something to make it a bit darker. But the other thing also about watercolor is that it's a transparent color. So you have to make sure that whatever's underneath here, so if you put blue down here and then you put something yellow over top, you're going to end up with green. So you want to make sure that you understand what's underneath this if you're going to have to go over top of it. So in my case, I'm going to put blue on here, and guess what? All of these trees are green, and so I don't care. It's going to be a lot lighter, so I'm not going to try and paint around every piece of this tree. I'm just going to go ahead and put it in. When I paint my skies, I paint them sideways. So here we go. I'll just make sure I can get this in. So I'm going to go and take my water, and literally, I'm going to scoop up. Why don't I use the clean side? See, that's why I use these little buckets. Get them from the dollar store. They're supposed to be for plants, but they're great watercolor buckets. So I'm literally going to take the water and scoop it right out of here and put it onto this. So it's really wet and you can see it in here. See how wet and shiny that is? You know that that paper is good and wet. The good news about watercolor is wherever you put the water, that's where the paint stays. It's kind of like a little fence. Then I go over and I have several blues in here. I've kind of got a turquoise, I've got a Prussian, a French ultramarine, and I've got a manganese. So I'm going to go get some blue and I'm going to put some in here. That's still not quite wet enough. I want it to run. Going to get another lighter color. Everybody's going, oh my God, this poor woman, how's she going to fix this? A little bit darker color here. And quite often I'll get just a tiny snick of, that's a painting term, snick, of violet on here. And see what happens when I run this back and forth? You can get it to move. I use gravity quite a bit when I'm painting. And see, it's just going to keep moving back and forth. And I'll end up with these neat striations of color. Now, if you said you want to have nice puffy clouds in there, you get a cloud maker, better known as paper towel. And when that's in there, if you just take and just kind of crunch it up a bit and just lightly tap on this, you will end up with some lovely clouds. If I take and tip this down, see there's still watery paint up there. When I tip it down like that, see how it's going to go and it really highlights that lovely edge there. And now it's going to make sure that I get a little bit of a cloud edge on there. Okay, so ta-da! We've got sky in there. And the really big deal with watercolor is you got to have a plan, Stan. You need to know that if I paint this, I can't paint anything else until close to this because it'll just all fuzz into here. So I need to plan and say, okay, if I'm going to paint my sky, then the next thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to come down here and work down here because I have to let this dry. I can put paint into here, but it's just going to want to join up and you don't want that. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here and I'm going to do some of the lawn in the front. And again, I'm just going to go ahead and let this wet. Going to go get my water and I'm just going to go in and lightly put some color in here. I'm going to go get some, I have sap green in here. I usually use one convenience green and just sort of put some in here. I'm going to go get a little bit of my, maybe some yellow in here. And maybe I use Aerolite, sort of an orangey yellow. Again, I can just go ahead and let these blend in. See how it's wanting to go and just sort of blend in a little bit. I know that I want this a little bit darker up at the front, so I'm going to use some of my Prussian blue because you always get a shadow at the bottom and along this edge and along here. So I know that I'm going to get a darker color because you can see the shadow underneath the tree on the picture. So there we go. Boom. Lawn. And that's where we're at with that. So this stuff, it does, and it's quite damp out today. So I'm hoping that, I said I never use a hairdryer. The reason I don't use a hairdryer is if I use a hairdryer, then all this stuff, and you can see how this is still kind of blending and moving around and just sort of blending together, how this is doing its thing. If you dry it, you freeze dry this thing in place, and you can't possibly paint this. You can't get, look at that cool sort of shape that's coming out there. You can't get that any other way. So I strongly suggest that you not do a lot of hair drying. I am going to take, I'm just going to see whether, how do you know if you can paint in this thing? So if you look here, you can see, can you see how shiny that is out here? But it's not that shiny here. So that means that we're getting close to it being dry enough for me to paint on, but I'm still not going to test my luck with this stuff. I'm going to leave it alone. I still have another place that I can go and paint. So I could either go in and put my roof in, which I suspect I will because I want to paint these next. So I need to get this drying. Or I could go in and work on this because it's not attached to anything else. So planning with watercolor is a really big deal. So lots of times you're just kind of going, okay, you can sit and watch paint dry, right? That's the other issue. Okay, so I'm going to use my roof. So what color is my roof? It's kind of a beigey kind of color. So again, I want it to be not just one plain color. So again, I'm going to go in and get some water on here, but I'm going to tap this off because I don't want this sopping wet like I did here. I wanted that to be able to move back and forth. So I'm just going to go get some kind of, I have a titanium buff over here that's that I bring out here. And maybe a bit of, oopsie, how about some of my, oops, that's not the right color. Let's bring this over here. Oh, look at that. There we go. We're kind of getting the right color. All right, let's go in and put this up here. All righty. There. So now we have a bit of roof on there. I'm going to get a little bit of extra, a little dark stuff so I can go through and just put some, I don't want this to be perfect. Otherwise it just looks like you've painted a blob onto this thing. I want it to be kind of modeled. Okay, so there we go, roof. But you can see right there, see how this obviously isn't dry that much because that's wanting to go join. It always wants to go and join up. Anytime there's water someplace or another, it wants to go head up there and join. So the way you can, I usually just leave it because we're going to put green over top of it. If you really want it not to do that, just take your paper towel and that'll dry that off and that's going to be fine. Okay, so now we have a roof on. We'll probably have some dark, and I quite often use purple to darken brown. And I'm probably going to have some dark parts in here because there'll be shadow from that tree that's coming in there. I should ask Pamela, has anybody got any questions so far here?
Yeah, there's a couple questions. I'll just
Okay.
read from the bottom up. So, Amanda's written, how would you go about painting the grayish brown of the tree trunks?
The tree trunks, if you want a grayish brown, French ultramarine and burnt sienna give you this lovely gray. So if
Nice.
you take burnt sienna and French ultramarine and you kind of go, okay, oh, look, and add a bit more. You kind of go, okay, look, that looks like a really nice gray color. Does that help?
And I guess an application for like dry time with all your waters, would you add that in after you've done all the green on the tree?
Well, Yeah, and I just like we're sitting here now. That's why I thought, well, I'll answer some questions. I'm kind of biding some time. This sky's taking a long time to dry today just because it's damp out. So actually all I'm gonna do is just take this and kind of damp this off because it's got the blue on it. So we'll be able to go. But most of the time you're outside, it's in the sun and it's you just stand there in the sun or and it usually dries. But that's part of the pleasure of doing plein air painting and being out here is that, you know, on Sunday we went out, it was pouring rain. So we had to find a place that had a cover and go and do it. So that's part of the fun. It is. And some of it dries, and the best thing you can do is not fuss about it and not get all that fussy about it. Quite often it'll fix itself as we're kind of going along.
Excellent.
Anybody else got any more?
And what kind of brush are you using today to paint?
The brush that I'm using right now, it's called a black gold 311, and I buy them from a company, unfortunately, in the States. But the deal is these are called mop brushes, and this will show you better up here. So see how they have a really big belly in the middle of it. So it holds a lot of paint and it comes to a lovely point down here. So you can get, I mean, almost all of the paintings that I do are painted with a large brush like this. So a quill or a mop brush are the best case that I've found. I rarely paint with a flat, rarely paint.
Yeah, Opus has a lot of really lovely selections for watercolor quill brushes. I
Yeah,
would throw Da Vinci folks,
yes,
beautiful, lots of options. I can see Beatrice kind of shaking her head up and down. Yes, maybe. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
they're really lovely.
So quill brushes a quill or a mop is that it's just got more um, bristles in the belly of it so that it holds more water because that's the deal with water and watercolor and paint and stuff is that you want to be able to get enough on here so that it actually does what you're wanting it to do.
And it's also a synthetic brush.
Yeah, this is a synthetic. When I first started doing watercolor, I rushed out and I bought a sable brush because that's what you should do. And actually I hardly ever use it. What I like about these brushes is they have what you call snap. And so when you pull this down, and let it go, it pops back up and it ends up and it keeps that nice point. I find sable brushes are just so like I can't do what I do, which is get up on the tip top of this sort of thing and paint with this lovely point. They hold a lot of water, but my preference has become, thank goodness, because they're a lot cheaper than buying a sable brush. And I think the that sable brushes are now like not in vogue because we're having to take little sables and take their fur.
That's very true. Yeah. Thanks for talking about the characteristics of brushes because it is just understanding the different characteristics and then which characteristics suits you as an individual artist out there. So thank you for mentioning the snap of the brush and that it's a quill and everything because that'll help people navigate the brush department.
Yeah, and that's the big deal when you first start doing this stuff is, I've gone out and bought a million different of brushes because so and so said this and so said that. So you're like, oh, I better try that. That might make it better. But I remember I took a class with a fellow by the name of Bjorn Bernström from Sweden, and he showed up and he put out this stuff and he had like 3 brushes total. And he goes, "You North Americans in your brushes," he said. And it's true. It's probably the least important thing in this whole scenario in that make sure you get good paper, make sure you get good paint, um, that you can then use the brush. I mean, people paint with sticks. So yeah.
Yeah, and on the topic of paper, it looks like you have an Arches. Are you
I
using
do. I
cold
did.
press?
I busted out the good stuff for today. So I have an Arches block. And so they look like this. And they're a convenience. You can take large sheets of paper and it's got this glue around the outside of it, and you stick a little palette knife in there and you take the glue off so you can take it back off of here. But it's nice because it's already like it doesn't wobble or wrinkle or anything like that when you're using it. So I busted out the big one today for this, just for you people. I hope you know I'm using my expensive stuff.
Very nice paper.
Okay, have we got questions? Yeah?
Yeah, I think we can move forward now.
Okay, all righty. And I think we're dry enough now. See, I stalled enough that if we can go ahead and do this. All righty, while I'm doing this, let's go talk about the trees. So when I do trees, I'm going to say that my light source is coming from this side and it's going to go across here. So all the tree bits on this side are going to be lighter. And if you look at my painting that I did, see how they're lighter on this side? And they're darker on this side. There's also dark in between where this tree is in front, and this is how the reader, the person looking at it, can tell that this one is in front of this because this has shadow on it. This one is in front of this because it has shadow on here. You can see how there's shadow down in the bottom here, right? Usually at the bottom of all the trees and all this stuff, there's almost always a dark part because that's where the bushes make all the shadows. So I go in and I am going to identify these trees to begin with, and I'm going to use some yellow. So I'm going to just use, this is Hansa Yellow Light, and I'm just going to go in and put some yellow very carefully. I always say that and everybody's like, what? So and when I do this, everybody then starts going blobbing. So you're trying to get it in sections. It looks like I'm just kind of dabbing this on here, but I do have a method to my madness. And so here we go. I'm going to put some yellow onto here. And then I'm going to go and put some other yellow. So there's my aerolide. So all of a sudden it's a bit darker already. So see how I'm sort of putting that beside that other yellow. Here we go. I guess I could put some down here for you guys. And I'm going to use my convenience green, sap green. You can use, lots of people use Viridian. But see, because that's wet already, when I put this on here, it's going to blend in and it's not going to show up that I've got all these blotches in here. It's going to show up and it's going to blend together as I'm putting this stuff on here. Alrighty. And see how this is just all kind of coming together. Now I'm going to use, I like using Prussian blue on these trees in here because it makes a really dark turquoisey kind of green. So here we go. I'm putting this in here on this side because that's going to tell us that this tree is in behind. I'm going to use some, and I try and use different stuff. So there's some French ultramarine on that one because it'll make a different color. And don't forget that there's some bushes or branches that are underneath. And see where I'm holding my brush. I am not down here painting. Come up here and this will give you a lot looser painting up here. And you can darken it again if you want, if you need some more dark on that. So then now you start kind of going, okay, well, that looks all too much the same. Just going to go. And see, because this is pretty wet stuff, you're going to end up with it being all blending together in here. I've just got water on my brush, and so that's just going to help to blend some of this stuff in. So all of a sudden, you've got trees, right? So we've got, so far I've used my two yellows, Hansa and Aerolide, and I used the sap green, and then I've used some Prussian blue and some French ultramarine. So use all of your colors, because all of those colors, like if I take and put some of this turquoise in here, see what a different green I get, but I get another green. So that's the idea, is to get some variety in here so that you don't have all the same thing. So this one down here in the front is mostly, so there's my Hansa yellow that I'm using. Any lemon yellow, Hansa yellow, all this stuff. I just keep trying to find colors that are a single pigment, and that's a really big deal. Say that twice. Single pigment. There we go. And so the deal is that sometimes when they go to put, especially convenience colors, they will put 2 or 3 base colors together to get a color. And that's why one color from Schminke and another color from Daniel Smith and another color from M. Graham, they all say that they are this particular color. I know Aerolite is one of those ones, and it isn't. You get it and you think, oh, that doesn't even look close to what I was expecting it to be. And so that's because they use different pigments to put it on there. And on the side of the tubes of the paint, you can go see what's in it. So it'll say PY, pigment yellow, or PR, pigment red, or PB, pigment blue, and it'll tell you what the number is. And there's some place that you can figure all that out. Depends on how technical you are. But anyways, just so you know, when you look at something, you'll say, oh, that's why in that brand, it's this color, and in that brand, it's another color. See all the tricks that you learn? All right, so I'm just gonna go down here and put some color in here for my bush. Now this bush over here, this smoke bush, that's what it is. I'm going to use some of my alizarin crimson and a bit of violent violet. I call her violent violet because she's very intense. So you want to make sure that you just use a little bit. So I'm going to go in and put some of these in. So see, I've got sort of a reddy purpley kind of color in here. So there it goes. And I just wash my brush out, tap it on here. Now, I quite often when I do that, I go back in here to the same bit, maybe get a little bit more purple on here because I want to make some darker bits. And see how I bring it out here onto this tray, out here onto this palette. And that's because now I can see how opaque this is on here. If I have more water on here, you can see that gets wishy-washy. This, when you bring it out here, this will tell you how intense the color is going to be when you put it on there. So I know that that's going to be darker there. So when I go and put this in my tree, and because this is still damp, where the other paint is, it's still just going to blend together. But I've left spaces, so you just need to make sure that it's close to the other paint so that it'll blend together. All right. And let's maybe go get a bit more of that because it's not darkening. Violent violet is not doing, there she goes. Now she's happy. Look at her. So see, that's how I try and do as much as I can in the first pass so I don't have to come back in and do a whole ton more afterwards. And you can see how this here, this wasn't quite dry so that my tree has blurred into there. But what am I going to do? I am going to leave it alone because if you go in and mess with it, you will really be unhappy. You're best off with watercolor to leave it, and later on we'll go put more branches on it. But the more you fuss with this and the more you try and fix it, the more unhappy you will be. So my advice is, and I always have when I teach a class, I have a sign up at the front that says leave it alone. And that's the big deal, that you're better off if you're unhappy with something to let it dry. Then you can go back in and paint over top of it. So we're just going to leave that alone. All right, so this is pretty dry. I'm going to go in and paint my house. And actually, I just had my house painted not long ago. A man came in. I was going to paint it green, and he convinced me to paint it this lovely reddish color. And I'm quite happy with it. So, all right. So again, it's kind of a red. color. So I'm going to use my alizarin crimson, and it's got a bit more brown in it. So I think I'm going to try with some, I'm going to brown this down a little. Oh, there we go. I think that's it. A little bit of burnt sienna in there, right? I think that's it. Just tap this off, and I'm just going to go in and get, I'll start with this. I'll put a light bit on it. And I can always darken this. Now, I got a little bit on my window. So if you just take a dry brush, and I use my cloud maker to take this back off again. So there we go. So there's the beginnings of this. And I think, okay, it's a bit too pink, I think. So I'm going to put a little bit more brown in it. And I know that underneath the eave, it's going to have a dark part underneath there. So I'm going to put that right in there, just right to start. All right. Now, what to do, what to do, what to do. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more. So I've got a little bit of that purpley kind of color in there. All right. I'm going to leave that and just kind of go, okay, do I like it or not? Now, when we look at this foreground here, and I've got some bushes here, I want this to have a bit more detail in it. So I'm going to just make sure. And if you want to know if watercolor paper is dry, if you hold the side of your hand on it, if it's cooler than the other part of the paper, then it's not quite dry. So when I put my hand on here, that's still damp. So it's not completely dry in there. It's still, this is cooler than it is over here. So that's one way. Otherwise, you also can get a handprint in there if you do it too soon. So, but this is dry enough for me to go back in and add some detail. So I'm just going to get some of my sap green here and just go in and make some better details in here, because this one is in the foreground and I want it to be a little bit more detailed. So see, when I paint over top of drier paper, it doesn't blur together like this did up here. Gonna add a little bit more again of my Prussian, because that, I like Prussian added to the green because it's a really nice greeny turquoisey kind of color when you're adding a blue. So we can go in and put some of that in there. So that just gives it a little bit more depth. Again, this is going to get darker down here in this foreground. And don't forget, when you're putting in cast shadows, it's not black. They're not black. The shadow that's going to be in the foreground, don't forget that it's going onto a green again. And so it's going to be a darker green. It's not going to be a black. It's just a darker value. So I'm adding more of my Prussian blue to this so that it's going to dark right in the back. And if you can't get it quite dark enough, add a little bit of purple to it. And that always really darkens this in. But see how I can get some shape into here. And this tells me that this is in the foreground because it's got a lot more detail into it. I'm going to take some of that same color and I'm just going to make this darker, even though, see, when I did that originally in the grass, it's still not all that dark. So I'm just going to put that cast shadow over to here. Alrighty, now I have some bushes in the front of the house. I just moved back into this house a few years ago, so it was a rental house for a long time. So it's taken me a while to kind of up the game of the gardens sort of thing and try and make it so that I'm not out there being a nonstop gardener. Alrighty, so there's the green. I'm putting some in there. And Again, we'll add some dark along this bottom of it. And see, I'm just tapping it in. I'm not doing a lot of painting. With watercolor, the best case scenario is the less painting you do, and the more you allow the watercolor to do its job, the better off you're going to be. While I've got some of that dark on there, I think I'm going to just strengthen these dark parts in behind here. And maybe strengthen this a little bit in here. And see, here we are up in this part that's blurred. Yeah, we'll just go ahead and add some more tree. That's the deal, right? This isn't a photograph. You can move the trees around. You can do whatever you want to do with the trees and stuff. Okay, so now with our windows, usually the windows, and if you look at the painting, they're usually a dark color. So I'm going to use some of my French ultramarine blue and just put some dark color in there. Oops, not wet enough. And you don't want to get too terribly fussy. I quite often, instead of just making these black holes, I'll kind of get it darker at the top, but allow this to just bleed out a little bit of water down here so that they're not just dark black. And then we have a little bit, that's why I like this stuff out here. I call this palette mud. So you can just take whatever colors you've got, and it's because sometimes it's just really hard to get a really light color of something. So I just water this down so that there's a bit of a shadow on that door, so it's not just one white blob. Oh, right, and that's because I had missed that when I did it. This needs to go up here. And while I'm kind of fiddling around and this is getting a bit darker, I'm going to put some, this is still pretty wet, but I'm going to put some red, sort of some flowers into here just so that it looks like it's not just another green blob. And we'll put some flowers up front because there are flowers. And my daughter has taken up, what do you call them? Apiary. She's a bee hive person. And so she brought a whole hive in my backyard. And so the flowers in the front are actually way cool because these bees are quite happy out there doing their thing. So, and let me tell you, beekeeping is a lot more work than you think it is. You don't just put those bees out there and they just go for it. Okay. Anybody got any more questions out there in Radio Land?
Yeah, we do have some questions out here.
Okay.
Let's see here.
And see, look at me squeezing out this water out of this sponge. That's how much water I've been gathering in this thing. So eventually you have to squeeze it out so that you've got something to take off. Okay, what's our questions?
All right, so there is a question about how to know how much water to use in order before applying the color with the trees and the background and the house.
Well, it depends on how, so when I put those trees in, so if I take my brush and tap it off, I've still got a fair amount of water in here. And if I go get some paint and I put it out here, you can see that it's still wet, but it's not sopping wet. If I go directly in and get paint like this, it's just, you can see there's water on there so that it's damp, but you don't want it puddling up on here. But the other issue is when you're doing this with the trees, is that you need to work fast. If you notice that I work fairly quickly, we just keep going because I need this to still be damp when I come back in with my other color. And as soon as I bump it up against that, see these edges here blur together so that they kind of blend back together again. So the really big deal is that I paint them. So you want to have it, you paint something and then you paint something beside it. And when they bump up against one another, they will blend back and forth together, just like this. And then you can't tell where one starts and the other one stops. So it needs to be, and that's the beauty of the sponge. So I've got a damp thing. I put this on and hold it onto here for a second. This is not completely dry. This has paint water in it, because when I go over here and pick up my paint, see, I've got water in it. And eventually, you know, because you've done it a million times, how much is going to be in there. If I want it really soppy, I'll just barely touch the sponge, and then I'm going to get a bit more water in it. But the deal is to keep putting this on and then keep moving around. So when I put all the yellow on, then I went back in fairly quickly so that I would blur and blend together. Does that answer your question?
That was a great answer. Maybe I'll just get a thumbs up there from Paula. In the meantime, I'll move on to the second question here. Actually, it's about the sponge.
Ah,
Sponge container. What
oh,
is
right.
that
Well,
sponge container? Where did you get the sponge container?
you go to the dollar
Ah, it
store.
is a soap container.
You go to the dollar store and you get a soap container, one of those travel soap containers. And the cool part is if you're out and you're painting outside, you've got a water container too. So now you've got this, and you've got a water container. So, you know, we try and travel as light as we possibly can. These ones I've been buying from a company in, you know, China sort of thing. And they come just because I have kits that I sell, and it's easier than me sourcing these. So yeah, dollar store, any of them will give you a sponge container. So yes, isn't that cool? But the sponge,
That's a great
honestly, the sponge has made a huge difference. It is, because I couldn't, the water thing, because watercolor's all about the water. It truly, truly is. It's managing this crazy water, as you can see, and this really helps to modify it. And
Does using the sponge work with all sizes of brushes?
yes, yes. I never, the only reason I have a paper towel was to make the clouds, and occasionally you've got a drip of water on or something. I never use these towels, or lots of people say get a, you know, terry cloth thing or all the rest of it. This here modifies the water thing and helps you learn how to modify the water. It really is helpful. Yeah, it's made a big difference. And
Okay.
I learned
Paula's
that
written
from
back.
I learned that tip from a fellow by the name of Alvaro Castagnet, who is a big name in watercolor, and he only ever uses a sponge as well. So yeah, big.
I like the technique. It's great. And the creative way of carrying it. Awesome. I'm all about
I
having a
know, because
perfect
otherwise
sponge.
you've got this wet, gooey sponge all over the place.
Yeah. Okay, so Paula's written back, and what she's actually seeking to know is to know how the paper is the right level of dampness to do trees, but not going to blend too much in the sky.
Okay, so you have to make sure that the sky is dry, 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 like, and you assess it. So that's why I usually do the sky first, because it takes a while to dry if we're going to put trees on top of it. So I start with this, because you got to have a plant stand. You start with the sky and you say, okay, this, by the time this is dry, I'll be finished down here, and then I can put my trees on. It is a planned attack on this whole thing. So you move around. You don't just keep painting one thing after the other. In watercolor, you can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I love how you mentioned pre-planning. It's
oh
especially
yeah, you got to have a plant stand. There's no watercolor. The whole key to it is really saying, okay, what am I going to paint first? So you know that if you paint this, then you can't paint that or that. If you paint this, then you can't paint that or that or that. So you need to make sure that you've got a plan. So you go up here and then you come down here and work down here. And by the time you're finished, you can go over and work on that. I just sort of, misjudged how wet that was, but it shows you how wet that is. And then you say, okay, well, if I don't really like that, then I go put more tree in, right? So there's nothing wrong with adding a bit more tree over there to that part. Who knows that there's not another tree there, right? And problem solved. But don't try and fix it. Don't try and rub it out, because then you'll mess with the sky. Then you'll mess with something else. The worst thing you can do in watercolor is try and fix it. Once it's on there and once it goes from shiny, and that's the deal, is that when you first put water on watercolor paper, you're going to get this on here and you'll see how shiny that is. See on there, you can see how shiny it is. Once it goes from shiny, while it's shiny, you can put paint on there and you can do whatever you want to do with it. It's perfectly fine. Once it goes from shiny and it starts to sink into the watercolor paper, and don't forget, watercolor paper has sizing on it. That's how they make it. And each company has their own little, secret method or whatever. But once you get this paint or the sizing on it, so some of them are sized front and back. The cheaper ones won't have it on the back. Ones like Arches will also have sizing inside the paper. So you got to get the water on. It takes it a second before it sinks in. It's kind of like when you drop, your wine onto the couch. It takes a second before it actually sinks in, and you got a second to get it off. It sinks in, and once those fibers open up, then it starts getting in between these fibers. It takes it a while, and then it turns from shiny to matte. When it's matte, that's the dangerous part. When it's a matte color, and I'm trying to, yeah, so this is getting, see if I can get it up here so you can see it. See, it's not as shiny as it was. So if I now go and put any water close to that, if I put water in here, see what's happening? The water shoves those pigments out of the way. And you can see, I think you can see it. See how it's pushing those pigments out of the way? So that's what they call blooms. And sometimes you want that. Sometimes I go in actually and intentionally do that on trees. So then it gives me a little bit more texture. But when it's in that velvety matte phase, leave it alone. Just whatever's there, just say, we'll fix you later on, and go take your mind off it and work someplace else. But the more you and so if you go in and try and fix this, you're like, oh man, oh, now what? Oh, I better add some. You just get yourself in trouble. So take my advice. You'll hear me in your head. Somebody, she'll say, leave it alone. Does that help?
That's an amazing answer. You've got lots of great feedback in the chat here. I can't wait to share it with you. So just because of the time check, we have 15 minutes. Maybe we'll keep going with the demo and then come back.
Well, this isn't going to be a great painting by any stretch, but you get the idea. More of it's the idea. So the only thing I would do is I would go in with a darker color and really go across here. Like, see, literally across all the windows and stuff. And the minute I do that, all of a sudden, look, you know that this roof is over top of that building. Look at that. And you go right over top because it makes that lovely dark line across there. And honestly, shadows and value changes are the answer to a lot of stuff. It tells you, and immediately it tells you something. So getting these shadows in and this kind of stuff is really big. So then the next thing that I often do that really, you're kind of going, well, I don't know, I don't really like this all that much, is quite often I'll go back in with my Sharpie and do some fixing up. And literally, so I'm just looking at this thing here, that's dry enough for me to go in. So I can take my Sharpie and go back in, and I'll try and keep my hand out of the way here. So you can go back in and add some more detail here with your Sharpie. And it kind of fixes a whole bunch of stuff up that you can kind of add. See, you can get some texture and some shape and some stuff in there. So don't hesitate to go back in with your Sharpie. The other thing that I often use is I like these the best. They're called Signo. See if you can see it. There we go. Signo pens. They're gel pens. And the purists say that that's not okay. But see, I've got white frames around the outside of all my stuff. See, I can go back in and put my window frames and stuff into here. And I can put that detail back in with some white. So, and the other cool part about these gel pens is that if you take your brush and kind of dab that off, because you don't want it stark white up at the top, it'll kind of blur out a bit. So that kind of, you can put some detail back in with this thing. The other quick trick I'm going to show you, just because we're, kind of doing some stuff, is a birthday candle. I use a birthday candle. I rarely use masking fluid. I don't like the stuff. It takes forever to dry and stuff. So if you're trying to make sure that you leave the whites, so to speak, then you can either paint around them, you can add them back in with your cheater tool, or I quite am warning, beep, 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 this, once it's on, it doesn't come off again. So once you put this on, it's not going to come off. So if I do this with my candle, see, now it will keep that clear. You can also go back in. Is this dry? No, that's not dry. This is dry. So if you go back in, you can do it over top of another color. So if you wanted to keep something really light, you could go back in. Of course, that's not going to do it because I'm trying to demonstrate something. Okay, let's see if I can get it to do it. Oh, here, we'll do it in the middle of the lawn. Okay, so see when I did that with my, so if you wanted that to stay light, now you can go back in and darken the lawn in there. And so you can use this. So sometimes if I want to just keep something a lighter color, and then you're not having to fiddle so much. So see, all of a sudden it gives you this lovely thing in the front. So I use a candle quite often. And it's a really good thing to kind of go across if you're just doing, problem is you can't see it, right? So you have to kind of, see, if I go along there and do that. See, let's see, where is it? See, there you can see the, it's kind of like the sparkles that you get on water when you're, trying to get those sparkles across on a lake. So that's kind of a thing that I use too, is the birthday candle. And I like these ones. It's hard to find because otherwise those little tiny ones, they just crack and you can't use them. But warning, beep, beep, beep. Once that's on, it doesn't come off and you can't paint over it. So make sure that you want it. Sometimes a little bit can go a long way. So just make sure that that's what you want. But what I really like about it is the fact that when you put this on, see how ragged that is? It doesn't look like you've gone in, because when you go in with masking fluid, you're like, oh, look, she used masking fluid, because it's perfect. And well, as you can see, none of my stuff is perfect. So the other motto I have is, if you can't make it perfect, make it as imperfect as possible, and then it looks like that's what you intended to do. So that's kind of another thing that you can use. But the little white thing will give you, if you need to go back in and just add a little tiny bit of something. Sounds good? See, and we could go back in and make some, look at that, flowers. I have daisies up front, so we'll put some white in. There we go. All right, how we doing? Anybody got any more questions?
Yeah, we're doing good. We do have some questions here.
Okay.
So since we were just doing the wax demo part, maybe we'll ask a few questions about the wax.
Yep.
Is the wax resist good for skies? Cheryl's asked.
Well, I would be really careful because once it gets up there, like, and you can't see it. So, it's really hard. You're better off when you're doing a sky, you're way better off to go in and use your towel to take it off again. So you can either resist, you can paint around it, or you can take it back off. And lots of stuff you can take off even. So if I wet this again, I can probably go back in. See, I can go back in and take a little bit of it off again. Um, but warning, beep, beep, beep. the more the more you mess with this, and then you're like, oh man, I wish I hadn't touched that. So you can get yourself into trouble. But I'm a really big one for the sky isn't the main event. The sky has to be there because we've got sky. So the really big deal is just to get this in there, try and not make it the main event, unless that's what you're out there doing is painting clouds, then that's a whole nother story that we kind of do. But in this case, if you need to take sky off, I really wouldn't get carried away with this because I don't think you'll be able to control it properly. Yeah, because you can't really see it.
And do you know, would a kid's white crayon work
Yes.
inside
Yes. If you
also?
can sneak it out while they're not looking, you have to go in, when they're sleeping and take their white crayon out. They probably won't notice. I don't know where it went, dear.
Such mischief.
I know. I don't know. Mommy's not sure where that went.
And then I'm just like moving up on the questions here. Okay, here we go. Oh, and the wax. If you were framing a piece where you use the wax, would it look different
No,
under glass?
no. And honestly, almost all of the paintings that I do, I put Dorland's wax over top of them. I don't frame any of my watercolor paintings.
Okay, and then now I'm just moving further up the chat because I know there's more questions up here. So just bear with me, folks. Okay. And I'm going up still. Oh my. Well, because you know why? Because there's so many awesome comments and encouragement and
Oh,
all of everybody's like knowledge that they brought into today's chat, which is incredible. Okay,
yay.
here we go. I found the spot.
Okay.
June's wondering if you show your work where are you located again?
Oh,
Your
I'm
home
in Qualicum. Yes. So
Welcome.
I have work at the Sandbar Cafe. I have work at the Salish Sea, at the Qualicum Arts, at the Macmillan Arts Center. Yeah, pretty much
I
there.
love it. You've got a visitor coming. June's coming.
Well, and there's a studio tour. When the heck is that? The 21st and 22nd. There's a studio tour all over the island, or not the whole island, from Union Bay down to Qualicum Beach. There's, I think, 30 different artists. So like my home studio will be open. So, or
Is
if
that
you're
in
in
September?
town, just get a hold of me. You can stop by.
Oh, that's so nice. And then okay, so I'm still cruising up this chat. I know there was one up here about markers.
Markers, you want to make sure that whatever you do, because I've gotten down that rabbit hole. So make sure that it says permanent on the outside of it, because if it doesn't say permanent, then when you go put water over top of it, you'll end up with a blur on it. But sometimes that's what you want. Sometimes I will use something. So like those Tombow pens that you get, those are great, but then you use water and they blur in. So make sure whatever you're using, and you can use a Sharpie, you can use, where are the little, what are the, I see, that's what happened. I cleaned my desk off and now I can't find anything. Oh, here we go. So these ones, the microns, those are really good. The micron pens, because they are permanent archival ink as well. I just am not sure that any of my stuff will end up in the Smithsonian in 1,000 years, so I'm not worried about it bleeding or fading too much. But those ones will make sure that they don't fade and they're permanent. So just make sure that it's permanent.
Yes. Do you ever use dry brush effects?
Yeah, if you're gonna do dry brush, you just, again, just take your paintbrush, and I use this, so you want a fairly dry brush, and I use this palette mud that's got just a little bit of water on it. And if you're gonna do that, so you can make some nice texture over top of something. So if you just take it and hold it on its side and just kind of drag it along, you will get the, is that showing up? Yeah. You'll get the texture of the paper showing through. I use cold press, not hot press. And so that'll help with that. So yeah, if you were doing like rocks or any of that stuff. So see, the drier this gets, and then you just lightly drag it across there, and you'll end up with kind of texture-y stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. And then I found the question that I was looking for. Chat, yay! It's Margaret's questions. She's written to you. She's written, Carla, do you ever use fine brush for your black lining instead of a pen, and use different dark colors for the lining? It would be a different look from the pen, more irregular, where the pen gives you a uniform line. I'd
Right.
love to see any work you have using a brush for lining.
Not usually. I don't use it. What I will do is I will use like a gel pen because it will bleed out. Some of the nice gel pens, like I've got one here in my sketch kit. So if you use like these lovely gel pens, so you can go in and do some sketching with those guys. And then if you put water on that, see how you'll end up with a bit of a brown shadow on it. So sometimes if I'm painting something that's all brown or whatever, or if I'm outside, I'll use a brown pen. But that's pretty much it. Most of the time I just use the Sharpie.
Yeah,
And most of it. So see, when you go back in here, you can go back in and make some definition with your Sharpie on this thing here, so you can get more definition again. But no, not for the most part. Sometimes I'll use a thicker brush. I use some brushes that are made of, where's that one? Okay, so these guys here, you can get, a lot of the Japanese use these. And so I just put some really watered down watercolor in here. And when I'm doing lettering, I will use it. And it's just like a brush that you can get. And they have those, I'm sure you guys have really cool brushes that you can get. So that's about all I could do. But you could do some line work with something like that as well.
nice. And the sponge for painting, does it wash out easily?
Yeah, I mean, this one's old and grubby and gross and whatever, but you just buy them in the store there in the kitchen section, and they have a little bit, I think they have some Javex or something kind of built into them because they don't mold. They're great, and then they just dry out. So yeah, I just rinse them out. Some of them look gross. I meant to use this nice new one, but I didn't. I was trying to show off a little bit with a clean brush or the clean sponge. But this is a fair amount of stuff that I do like I like going out and sketching on site, and then I will use different stuff. That's that brush I was just showing you to do some lettering on it. So I will use that. But most all of this is done directly with a Sharpie. All of it.
Lovely sketchbook.
So yes, that's kind of, this is what I aim for, is like travel sketching. So that sort of thing where you kind of go and put something together. We were in a little town, for example, and Zoltar gave us a see, there was Zoltar. But you know, that's kind of the idea, is that these are kind of memories of where we've been and what we've done and all that sort of stuff. So I take my sketchbook with me a lot. I was just over in Port Renfrew the other day, so yes. So that's the aim for me, is that it's quick, it's simple, it's portable, it's clean. And I take this and now I have these really cool memories, and I remember where I was, and you know, I get to talk to the coolest people that when I'm sitting on the street corner, they always stop. And so the other thing is that this is my sketch kit. This is all I take. I mean, I took this with me for 6 weeks to Italy to paint with. So I have a little folding palette that I take with me. That one's pretty gross. I have a little doggy bag. Betty always goes with me. And a little folding cup. So, you know, that's the stuff. You just kind of gather your stuff, but you can paint with such a little amount of stuff. It doesn't take much at all to go out into the wilds and do this. And it's a much better trip when you're doing it with a sketchbook.
That's a really lovely practice. So there's a question about how you hang your work if you're using the door lens wax and not using frame.
Well, here, let me grab one. So this is one here, and it's just directly onto a wooden frame, and I glue it directly onto there and paint it. These ones here don't have a frame. They're just glued directly onto the wood. And then once it's dry, you just use the door lens wax and you put it on. I just put it on with a cloth. So that's the stuff. And you just put it on. It's kind of like, you know, what was that movie, Wax On, Wax Off? So you just put it, I put it on with I put a glove on because it's kind of sticky, and put this on, and then take a nice soft cloth and buff it. And then I'll usually leave it for a bit and put a second coat on. And literally once that's on there, you can see water just beads up on it. So it's pretty user friendly. So then you don't have to mat and frame everything.
How do you glue the paper onto the panel?
There's a million different videos, honestly. Just go have a look at it. But most people use matte gel medium on it and put it on, like smooth the glue out with like a credit card kind of thing, and then put it on. Make sure that the piece of paper is a smidge bigger than the thing, and then you flip it over and take an X-Acto knife and cut it right along those edges. And then it just, you can't even tell. I think I've got some. I have any prepped. I don't think I have any prepped. Yeah. Oh, I do. Here's one. Yeah. So they come out and they look, I mean, it's hard to tell where it is. So once it's there, you just turn it over and then just go along with the X-Acto knife and cut the paper off, so that that's how you get that really cool edge on it.
Very nice. Well, thank you for your expertise today.
You're more than welcome.
Yeah, it's been so much fun being here with you today. I'm going to switch the spotlight so everyone can see you. So you can maybe, if you've got, we're running over now because there were so many questions, and the chat was so wild, and it's been so much fun. I'm going to make sure you get this chat because it's just loaded with awesome, sweet content.
Oh, wow. That's good. Thank you, guys. Well, I love teaching it because if I can encourage anyone else to get a tenth of the amount of pleasure and enjoyment out of painting, then my work is done, because it's a really good practice. It really, really is.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much for sharing it with us today. And I hope you have a lovely day. I hope everyone has a creative weekend, and I hope to see you again sometime in the future.
Anybody's in Qualicum, make sure you look me up.
And check out our YouTube videos. Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
I have a whole online classes. There's like I don't know, there's 30 different projects on there that you buy them. They're pretty cheap. And the books come with videos that will show you all this sort of stuff too. So check those out. My sketchy friends.
Lovely. Thank you.
Bye guys.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in, and thank you Opus for doing stuff like this, because it's just it's such a pleasure, and it's hard to find, sometimes it's hard to find a little thing that you can just sit and watch. So thank you.
Yeah, we so appreciate you, all the artists and the whole community. It's my favorite thing. So,
Good.
bye guys.
Bye.